What does it take to make workshops work? My name is Miriam Hatness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the quest to find the magic ingredient that expert facilitators use to make it easy for participants to get from confusion to clarity to action. Today with me on the show is Sam Brad, visual facilitator and information designer. We speak about the magical power of visuals, how they can reveal the unsaid, and we speak about the role of the graphic recorder, the person who listens to the room, translates insights into pictures, and creates a safe space without even actively participating. So stay tuned. And if you're listening to the show while commuting, walking, or exercising, don't worry if you don't have a pen and paper at hand. You can visit workshops.work, search for episode 38, and download the summary of my golden nuggets instead. It's all free. So I see you there. And in the meantime, enjoy the show. Hello, Sam.
Hello.
Thank you for joining me for this super early interview. 6:30 Canada time, right?
That's right. Yes, on the West Coast. That's right. So yes, a very good morning to you too, Miriam.
Awesome. I'm in Berlin. It's the afternoon. And I'm going to join the Change Days conference. And now I am so excited to talk to you about visual facilitation and about facilitation for change or facilitating change or visualizing change. You're going to explain me everything about it. So your organizational company is called Drawing Change.
Yes.
And I wonder what the story is behind it. What brought you to visual facilitation and to this name?
Yes. Thanks for asking. And what a coincidence, a beautiful serendipity that you're also at a conference about this. I feel that I stumbled into the name Drawing Change, and maybe it grew with me along the way. And so my background, my work background was first in nonprofit management. And so I always came to do work that was about the social good and centering people and folks that were working for social justice. And it was always something that I thought was going to be part of my life forever. And so folks always ask, like, did you go to art school or were you always an artist? And the answer is no, and also yes, because I didn't go to art school, but instead I worked for organizations that were working for progressive movements or, for example, for students or folks with disabilities or the LGBTQ sector. And along the way, drawing was the way that I was like, we need to explain something. We need to be able to explain this complicated legislation that was coming, or how to distribute grant funding, or anything else that seemed that it could benefit from a little bit of translation. And so this was how I stumbled into the idea of you could draw things to explain them. And then someone's like, did you know that this is a job? I was like, no, tell me more. So that's what happened.
Awesome. And before I ask the question, or I go deeper into the translation part, because I love it, I cannot resist to ask you the question that if you were a hashtag, what would you be?
I think the hashtag would be Drawing Change.
Nice.
Yeah. Because
so consistent.
Yeah, I know. And I thought about this ahead of time. And the reason why is because now that we help organizations with their leadership and with their visioning work and their strategic planning, what we're inviting them to do is the process to draw their own change. And I really think that if you can see it or if you can feel it, it's a path that then becomes available to you. So when you open yourself up to the capacity for change, then more things are possible. So now, I mean, we might have the markers, but really when we can democratize those pens and share the markers with other people, share the process with other people, then really they're the ones that are drawing change.
That's beautiful. And I just visualize this drawing change as you're drawing your path towards change. So you're drawing the future. So it's not only the literal drawing, but also the envisioning.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so with any kind of visual work, there's the sense that you can stretch or expand or even compress time, right? And so anybody who loves to read comics will know that you can be transported back into history, or you can be projected into the future, or you can help somebody go deeper into what they're experiencing right now. And I think that's one of the reasons why people really can respond well to adding creative tools and adding visuals to their meetings. It's because you can do all of those things. You can help somebody map out and make sense of the past, how we got here. You can talk about the current state and connect ideas right in front of them, or ask them to connect ideas right in front of themselves or their group. And then there's this idea where you can together, draw out what the future is.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think people always ask is, but I'm not an artist. Like, how can you ask me to draw, or how could you ever be a graphic recorder or a graphic facilitator if I'm not an artist? And I think that's a really valid perspective. I think a lot of us are told, as kids that, you can do anything and that drawing is great for you as a kid. And then there's somebody that comes along and says, no, you're not good enough. And I think one of the responsibilities of anybody who invites creativity into meetings is to tell you that you are good enough, and you don't need to be a fancy artist to tap into that wisdom and to tap into that creativity. So, you might see a graphic facilitator that has beautiful drawing skills, but there's a whole range of ways of communicating in meetings that is also about stick figures, simple shapes, lots of text, using color, organizing information well, that isn't about being a fancy artist, and that anybody really can do that. And so if someone's out there listening and they're like, but, and I'm like, yes, you can. You totally can. I believe you can.
And there's so many layers to what you said. There's one, which is the translation that you referred earlier to. And the second is organization of information, that you can also do it through text and through colors. So maybe you can first explain what you mean with the translation bit of visualizing, and then how else can you organize information if not through pictures?
Yes. Okay. So maybe I'll paint a little picture for folks who may be meeting facilitators, or they've been in a session as a participant and maybe have not seen graphic recording or graphic facilitation done live. And so maybe they've seen like a beautiful picture of a meeting afterwards. But what you can imagine is that I would come to your meeting, and let's say that I'm your graphic recorder for the day. I'm going to hang up a giant sheet of paper, and my role is to listen deeply and then draw what's happening. And when I mean draw what's happening, it's not like I'm interpreting it like a painting or like a court reporter. What I'm doing is listening and then organizing the information in a way that translates it from ideas that may feel like zoom, 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 scattered all over the place, into something that tells a story. And it tells a story in a way that has integrity and a sense of wholeness about what happened. And so I think the wholeness is important, because it's each person who does this work as a graphic recorder brings their own perspective and subjectivity. And so it's not like I am suddenly a neutral or robot translate typing machine. I'm there because I have the ability to synthesize information or summarize information or add hierarchy and scale and these ways of communicating it visually. And so that's the difference with our work. If we just typed it all up on a flip chart, it doesn't have the same impact as when we can create something that is meaningful and also beautiful. And so how we do that is also this really interesting part. And so there are people working at the very, very top of this field, the very best of this field, that draw very little. But instead what they do is they have a mastery of being able to organize the information with what we would call scale and contrast and grouping information. And again, those skills of like synthesis and summary on that spectrum. And so pulling out the main ideas and giving that emphasis, organizing things into consistency with like, what is a big heading? What is a subheading? What is like the connecting and the threads that go through this? How do we show movement with arrows and with color to color code it? And all of that sounds totally reasonable if you're a graphic designer, but the ability to do it live and in real time,
Mm-hmm.
that is the app. That's the superpower. That's the superpower.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so other folks will come in with more skill around illustration, which is also completely valid. And so the folks who come in with more skill around being able to visualize it with pictures is powerful, because I think many people connect when they can see their ideas drawn. Mm-hmm. It's a way of validating that there was a story and now a story has been made visible. There's a way of creating imagery for something that maybe was even unspoken. There's ways of using different lines, different textures, or creating something that is under the surface. Bring that, and you can bring that out. So again, there's this range of ways of working, and depending on our role as consultants, then we can operate smoothly and make these good choices about how we're going to show up.
I have one semantic question.
Of course.
Of course. What is the difference between a visual recorder and a visual facilitator?
Oh, yeah. Thanks for asking. So this is something our field talks about on a regular basis, and there's not one answer to this. I can give you my perspective.
Please.
And that I feel that graphic recording and graphic facilitation, or visual recording and visual facilitation, are different skills. And so it's about the relationship that you have with participants in the room. Mm. There are many relationships happening when you're doing this work. Part of the book that I wrote and co-edited a few years ago has this little model in it with my colleague Jennifer Shepard. And the little model talks about this 9-part relationship. There's me relating to myself in the room as the practitioner. There's me relating to the artifact that I'm drawing. There's me relating to the participants, but then the participants are relating to the picture. They're relating to the other facilitator. They're relating to the room. And so all of this is happening. And when we began to map out those relationships, it becomes clear that if you are listening and drawing and focused on the visuals, you may be acting as a graphic recorder. Your emphasis is attuned to a different set of those relationships as your primary focus. Mm-hmm. If you are a graphic facilitator, you're talking, drawing, attuned to the group. You're responsible for the container. You're responsible for moving those relationships and the agenda along, and also drawing what's happening. And so when I'm a graphic facilitator, I may be helping groups map a question around leadership or somebody's strategic plan, or it could be around, I had this beautiful project a few years ago where 6 people in a giant health authority hospital setting wanted to know what really happens when an elderly person shows up with a Ziploc bag full of medication in the ER, in the emergency room. What happens? And so we mapped that out, because that conversation could only happen with those 6 people in the room. And so we drew it, and then we erased, and we drew it some more. And by the end of it, it was a very messy diagram, but it was perfect for what we needed. And so graphic facilitation has this capacity to be more engaging when you are speaking and guiding the process. Graphic recording has the ability to create graphics that have more detail and attention, because your focus is in a different way while your partner, your co-facilitator, is working with the room. Okay. Having said that, if you are a graphic facilitator, you may be doing the role of graphic recording and also be a graphic facilitator.
Okay. Everyone is included.
Everyone's included.
So if I understand it correctly, according to your interpretation, the recording is more of a documentation role, whereas the facilitation is almost like drawing or designing a process, but in a co-creative way. Yeah. And I can perfectly see the benefits, because I spent in my previous life so many hours in trying to disentangle a process and make it clear. And then we got lost in details or lost in words that we used but meant different things. And it was not fun at all.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I have one question. Of course, that's why I'm here, right?
I love it. That's right.
I guess I have many more questions. When I imagine you drawing, and you're working very often with social cases, so in vulnerable topics as well, how can you create this kind of safe space and to connect with your participants if you have a pen in your hand and you constantly look on the paper below you or at the wall? So how can you do both? Maybe that's naive, but
No, that's such an important question. I feel like this question now is so valid because graphic recording and graphic facilitation is expanding right now. It's in a wave of expansion. So we have more and more practitioners who are bringing this tool into fields where maybe there has never been graphic recording before. And we have a lot of people who are self-taught, which is important, but also may not have colleagues around them to have this conversation with. And so how do you build safety? How do you build something that is working towards safety? Yeah, as a practitioner. And so I can talk about this in a couple of ways. And I'll offer that I do a lot of writing specifically about visual practice and cultural safety, especially around anti-Indigenous racism. And so for folks that are interested, there are lots of resources on the website at Drawing Change around this. And so I think
everything on the show notes. Also your book.
Yeah.
I think will be there.
Because it's like a huge, it's a very big topic. So the important part is that I like to tell people, you just don't show up and draw. That might be the experience for somebody seeing you, but there is a lot of work that needs to happen before you arrive. And so like most things, it's 80-20. 80% of the work is before you arrive. And so you need to be deeply aligned with what your client or the organization needs. And that means if there's a topic where you don't know very much about it, you either need to learn a lot or you need to find somebody who is the best fit for that job. And sometimes it's important that you bring somebody who doesn't have that lived experience because they'll be able to stay centered and present and grounded and not triggered. And sometimes what the group needs is somebody who does have lived experience, and the visuals will look different. But the ability for that person to relate to the participants in the room, their own standpoint, their body, that means that those people in the room will feel something towards safety.
How do you know whether you need background knowledge or not? Because I guess often your client doesn't know.
Yeah. I guess there's the part about context and the part about content. And so when you have a grounding in something that is like trauma-informed practice, a trauma-informed perspective carries across many, many topics. An anti-racism perspective carries across many different meanings. A perspective around gender equity, transgender inclusion, gender-based violence, those are lenses that you bring to almost any meeting. And so when you have kind of a deeper understanding of those topics, you will be able to listen in a nuanced way. The other thing about content, I mean, reading books, going to meetings, asking questions, being humble, staying in that place of I don't know what I might not know, and having the ability to be challenged along that is very important. The next part would be that many meetings do have similarities because humans are humans in lots of ways. And so even though the meeting, like the organization might be about substance use and people who are newly like parenting or who have newly given birth, the meeting itself might be about that topic, but you're looking for things like connection, and there's issues around nonviolent communication or leadership that's happening. And so those are like cross-cutting also. So when you become an experienced practitioner, what I like to say is like, you're not there to teach them what they already know. You can reflect what they already know, but that actually might be a very small part. Like I'm not there to teach people who have lots of experience around homelessness, what homelessness really feels like, because they know, and I can acknowledge that visually in a small way, and then visually show what we are there to build together. Right? So actually spacing it on the page and not getting swept up in my own big feelings about a topic is important.
Okay. But I didn't mean to cut your thought process off about how to be present with the group and creating safety while also drawing at the same time. So having your focus, because you need to split your focus constantly.
You're right. Thank you. So the other important part is when I arrive, I have a good relationship with the client that's hired me, with the facilitator that's also in the room. If I'm the one facilitating, it's a bit different. But then I introduce myself to the group. It's really important, I think, that people introduce themselves to the room and say a tiny bit about what my role is and say a tiny bit about why I'm there and how I can help. And the thing that I always add is that I'm there to listen deeply. I'm there to draw in order to help the group make connections and see their ideas, and that the images belong to you. And by saying that, I really try to invite people at the break, at lunchtime, to come over and talk to me about it. And I let them know that they can help me change or add anything that's needed. And so it does two things. One, it like calms people down in case they're like, what is happening in the corner? So it reassures their curiosity. Two, it invites them into a two-way conversation. So it really shows that like I'm there for them, not just like some super special whatever in the corner. And then once that's set, then it's about me staying present and focused and doing all of that inner work that we need to do as experienced facilitators. So this is why a facilitation lens is crucial for this work. Mm-hmm. Being able to stay centered, know what my triggers are, know when I don't agree with something, but still have to be attuned and ready for it. All of those things around like shifting my state and visualizing meshing when things get really intense or not intense. Being able to have like a range of skills to stay as present as possible, because you are holding a lot in a way that like a participant gets to like discharge or kind of like leave the room. There's a different set of skills that are needed because it needs to get channeled through me and onto the page. But if I have more skills around how to do that in a healthy way, I'm going to be able to serve them and me better.
Okay, so if I understand it correctly, there are always two facilitators then. One who would be there for the conversation to guide the group and one who would be there to capture it visually.
Yes, when someone is a graphic recorder, you are often working with a partner who is a facilitator. Yeah. In my work, about half of the time, I'm working in a partnership, and the other half of the time, I'm the one leading the meeting. And so I'm able to speak from both perspectives. But for many people who are graphic recorders or who are graphic practitioners, they're going to be working in partnership in order to present this like team, this like really a beautiful team approach. It's like a dance that we do with the other facilitators in the room.
Nice. Would you, when you work as a facilitator, would you then interact with the group on the visualization and ask them to interpret, or do you think this would hijack the process maybe?
Oh, yeah. So this is great. I feel like there's such a range of ways to ask the group to engage with you. It's something so, it's not like a sadness, but it's almost like a disappointment if I'm invited to help with this tool that I know is so powerful, and then there's no time in the agenda to allow people to integrate what they see. And so being introduced is important. Having space for the visuals to be displayed is really important. And then allowing time for participants to engage with the pictures, the imagery, the words, super important. And so in our field, we often call this a gallery walk. And so we'll display all of the posters. And it could be a range of things. It could be including things that participants have made, the flip charts from other activities, other outputs or deliverables. But to create a gallery and then have a juicy question or two and set of Post-it notes, because as you know, you can't have a meeting without Post-it notes, and ask people to go around. And you could do it with a partner and have a conversation, or you could invite more reflection for a bit of quiet time and let people write their questions down or ask for clarification. And so this is so important because some people will know that something doesn't quite feel right or it needs to be like adjusted, but they don't want to come up to me for whatever reason. Having those Post-it notes is like, oh yeah, great. I could totally adjust this to make it even more meaningful. Or we ask people to like say, okay, what's like the yes, the big aha? They can review. Basically, it's like walking into a room full of your ideas. And so you can imagine if you're at a 2-day strategic planning, you come in the morning of day 2, you are surrounded by this output that you created, right? It wasn't like I was the conduit, yes, but really it's the room's wisdom. And so allowing people to have a bit of that reflection time is really important. Yeah. The other way to do it is at the end of the day, the graphic person, the graphic facilitator walks the group through the pictures. And what I can offer is that I think one of the best practices is to allow the person who made these images to speak to them. It's an opportunity for the room to understand how were things drawn, what stood out. You have this person who is a dedicated listener, a public listener. My colleague Anthony Weeks talks a lot about like, what is it to be a listener? His work on this topic is amazing. He's been scribing for 20 years. Also here on the West Coast, the First Nations of the area where I live have a long tradition of witnessing, people who are the witnessing. So I live on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. And so this idea of inviting people to listen deeply and then carry that with them. When you are able to walk the group through at the end of the day, you're sharing a gift. You're sharing something that's been inside of you. And so if you can, as a practitioner, asking for that 5 minutes on the agenda, 15 minutes on the agenda, to give that back, to reflect people back, it's very empowering, can be very insightful. So there's lots of ways to integrate that with the room.
Before we continue the show, let me take a brief moment to thank our sponsor, Session Lab. Are you using Excel or Word to prepare and schedule your workshops? Try something that is designed for facilitators. With an easy-to-use drag-and-drop agenda builder, Session Lab allows you to be free and creative in your workshop process design. Session Lab also comes with an immense built-in library of workshop activities and facilitation techniques to help you to find new inspiration for your sessions. Stop messing with spreadsheets and focus on designing engaging workshops. Try it as sessionlab.com. I wouldn't recommend it if I didn't believe in its value myself. It resonates a lot with me right now because it's next week that I will release a episode with Oscar Trimboli on deep listening.
Oh, great.
And how to listen to the room. So to listen to the unsaid. And from what you just explained, it seems almost like the perfect complement where you visualize the unseen or even the unsaid.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That I can't wait. I can't wait. And I'll add that there is someone in our field, Kelvie Bird. Kelvie Bird is, again, one of the most experienced and deep listeners that are out there. Probably, yeah, she's a personal hero. And sorry, Kelvie, if you're listening and blushing when I say that, but that's okay.
You may.
And one of the tools that Kelvie offers is a model for listening. And I won't do it justice if I explain it, but I'll just encourage people to look up her work and the levels of listening, because there's the ability to listen for a word and then to draw that word. So you're listening like that, which is valid. I do a ton of work for scientists and policy people and researchers where they have like super detailed words and numbers, and I need to make a picture to explain that in plain language. But then there are other levels of listening that we can move to, especially when work is in dialogue, and then when work is about surfacing what is even unsaid, and that there are visuals that can help us do that. And how do we create a place inside of ourselves to be able to move into that type of listening? I think that's one of the most important things. How do we stay in a place where we're okay with what has yet to be?
And I wish that the audience would see your face now and this kind of passion and spark in the eye when you explain that. Beautiful.
I'll send a picture. Yes. Sparkle eyes.
Screenshot. And at the same time, I developed this compassion and deep empathy with you visual facilitators, because just imagining the responsibility that you carry to listen to put it on the wall, visible, public, without the possibility to actually ask a question. So you cannot just interrupt the flow and say, hey guys, just a quick question to see whether I got it right.
Yes.
I guess this would be totally inappropriate. So how long did it take you to kill the monkey in your mind that will tell you, oh, you got it wrong. What if I misunderstood?
Super great question. Yeah, if there's anybody out there who is a graphic recorder yelling from the back of the room, hey, did I get it right? Yeah, don't do that. Yeah, so a long time. And I think that there's always that part of me that's asking. And so, like, how do I know? How do I know? I think I try to work from a place of empathy and put myself in the shoes of somebody who is there. So somebody who is like the voice of the most affected in the room. Would they be proud to see themselves reflected in this way? Would they feel like I am on their side? Even if the topic is hard, am I with them? Am I for them? That is one of the lenses that I like do my work from. And when I began, it's really different if you have been a fine artist or an illustrator or any kind of two-dimensional practice where you have a lot of time to create something and it's your vision, and then you bring it forward and then people respond to you based on whether they like your vision or not. Mm-hmm. This is different because you're actually not there for yourself, you're there for the other people in the room. And so being able to work rapidly and iterate is a very powerful skill in this way. And so, like we have ways of adjusting and covering up our mistakes and changing our minds. Like we use labels and paper, and that's fine. But the confidence to know when you're ready to do it live, this is the key. So there's scaffolding that's possible. At Drawing Change, we do a lot of work that's live, and we also do a large amount of work that allows us to iterate with clients who don't even live in the same time zone. So somebody will send us a large report, or I work a lot with the World Health Organization. Sometimes I'm there with them live, but often, it's scientists and whole interdisciplinary teams. And they send me PowerPoint decks or giant documents, and I draw them and I send back a draft. And then based on their feedback and our conversations, I adjust them and draw them again. Mm-hmm. And so being able to draw and get feedback with my studio work allows me to get better for my live work, because I know when I'm working with epidemiologists, this is the right type of visual. This is why you would never wear a lab coat in this situation. Or, the vaccines don't look like this. Don't Google image
details.
Search or whatever.
Yes.
Right, it's the details.
I wouldn't have even thought about that. Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So it's an entire new vocabulary that you're learning.
Yeah. And so if you do want to bring in more illustration work, like more like specific visuals, either you need to feel secure in that you're going to try to get something right. And if you do try to transplant an idea and someone's like, yeah, but we don't do that here, then you're like, great, I'll fix it. So again, like trying and then being able to adjust it this is the key, and not making people feel bad in any way for letting you know that. It's like almost like a compliment. If somebody feels safe enough to tell you what they need, even if they don't say it in a way that you would prefer to receive feedback, if they felt comfortable enough to coming over to you, they broke that wall, you're on the right track. It's important.
What is, according to you, then the best way to use the visual afterwards? And the reason why I'm asking is that I had a conversation with Mireille Böhmer about documentation of workshops, and that the meeting minutes that nobody reads, so it's better to have a picture,
right,
or drawing with which you can interact. But how do you use it? What would you advise, or what are your best practices in that?
Yes. It's important for people to know that these visuals should have a life afterwards. And what we do is, if you can imagine, these are 7 or 8 foot posters for a 2-day meeting. Let's say it's a strategic planning meeting, because that will give us a bit more depth to this particular example. We will send back digital copies afterwards. So we'll photograph them. The client keeps the posters, and then you have images for print and for web. And so what folks can do is they can use them for engagement. So let's say that you've got a couple of staff people that weren't able to make the meeting. You might decide to hang up the big posters in a public area or a staff room and use Post-it notes to continue that conversation. What did we miss, or what can we add, or what stands out for you? So engagement. You might decide to distribute the information. So putting it online, putting it in a report, crop things for PowerPoint, basically like more public or internal facing distribution. And what's important, I think, about the distribution is that people might need to read a report, but they're never going to get there unless they care about it. And so by showing them the picture, we invite their curiosity, we invite them into it, and then they're like, okay, so I have the high level, seems like this was valid and relevant for me, now I can go deeper.
So it's a complement instead of a substitute.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And then I think the third way is around refining the information. So by refining it, let's say we do have 7 or 8 posters, it could almost be too much. What we do sometimes is we have this whole process tracking, but then there's like a gem from poster number 1 that needs to go into something. Then we redraw it. So then we have a separate project where we take all of the best information and we redraw it, and then we send that out. So it's like the very best and the highest quality that we could do. And so sometimes you will see projects out there that look like they've been drawn live, but actually they were drawn in this like revision and iteration process. And so there's this integrity that there's a process that happens live with the group. And there's this integrity that this is really the conversation that we want to put forward publicly.
Do you have something like a success story of a drawing you made that had an impact afterwards, or where you're like, oh yeah, this showcases how important and big visual facilitation can be?
Oh, I don't know. So many of them. I feel, it's a good question. It's a good question. Okay. So, sometimes it's not unusual that somebody in a meeting might come up and like have tears in their eyes because they feel heard. And for the first time in that particular meeting, they know that their voice mattered and that somebody heard them and heard them in a way that reflected what they were trying to say. And so I feel like sometimes it's about that one person coming up to us. And that's a very powerful experience. And then I think sometimes,
I just want to take 1 second to thank you for this example. Because when I asked the question, I thought of something big and something like media and millions. But this example of one person who feels heard in a meeting that otherwise wasn't, I think that's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad because it really is like the most meaningful thing when somebody invites you into that conversation, right? I think there's something powerful about an artifact or a poster that you can talk through it, right? Like they can point to the picture, we can talk about it. It's kind of like when you're having a conversation in a car or you're driving and you're having like the big conversation because you're not really looking. It's a little like you're looking a little bit, but also you're looking at the thing. So we can talk about the drawing and talk about things that are emotional or about healing or about coming from a place of like healing trauma. Like these are things that are possible. Yeah. And then otherwise, as for impact, things have been downloaded hundreds of thousands of times. It depends on who we work with and why. Sometimes, the majority of our work never makes it to the internet, but we know that it has an impact because of the change work that group is leading. And so whether it's a strategic plan where somebody needs to pivot or articulating a theory of change or being able to make a pitch for an award-winning piece of software that's going to save lives, like we know that the visuals that we've worked on have gone to do great things, even though I'm not in the room when it happens. I know I get the little stories afterwards. It's really exciting.
Awesome. And one thing that I'm curious about, I always ask the question of what makes a workshop fail. And I would be particularly interested in your opinion, especially in your role when you're in the graphic recording part, because then you really sense the meeting and the workshop and the flow without interfering or without being active part of it. So a failed workshop, what makes it fail according to you from the perspective out of a corner?
Oh, yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. It's true because we, in a space of a year, hundreds of meetings, hundreds. So many things actually like leave people feeling worse than when you started. So when you know that people are leaving worse than when you began, the meeting has been a failure. Sometimes it's not about the staying on topic or staying on the agenda, but like lack of disrespect. I remember a meeting once where I was the graphic recorder and I worked for like a very professional, fancy consulting firm. There were probably 15 people in the room. At any point, 10 were talking at the same time. 10. And like, I come from a Sicilian family. Family dinners are loud. This is not a thing where like, I'm like, oh, only one person must speak at a time. I don't understand how that power struggle could have been effective in any way. And yet we needed to like find the path through. So was it the loudest voice that I was going to listen for? Was it the person who only said one thing in the meeting? I was just like, there's nothing helpful about a competition when actually you're all supposed to be on the same team. So that one really stood out because it was 15 people and it was a travesty. It was a travesty.
How did it end? Or how did you or the facilitator find?
I feel like that facilitator needed to bring like some like big bro energy and just kind of went with it and was like really funny. And it was interesting because like on a scale of like sensing conflict, like making jokes is like part of that scale, right? Of like being like moving towards like something is really like not okay here. But my job was to, capture their brainstorm and leave very quickly. And that's what they needed. And so I just like tried to swim with the current on that one. But as for like, was it productive? Did they get the best ideas? Probably not. They probably fell into a lot of groupthink and and again, like that spirit of competition. I don't know how they were going to decide. It was a couple of years ago and memorable. But, some good practices for other meetings. I feel like when meetings, we do this thing here in North America a lot in big conferences where we work through lunch. Mm-hmm. This is almost unheard of in most European meetings, I would say. I feel like ignoring that people have bodies is also a sign of like, maybe your meeting is not leaving people whole. So
you have needs.
Yeah, you have needs. And I know because as a graphic recorder, I might want to go to the washroom or I might want to go have lunch, get something to eat while I keep drawing. And so I noticed that sometimes we really expect people to be like these passive vessels for like absorbing. But people really need meetings where you have this unique opportunity to meet and talk to people. Mm-hmm. And so when I see an agenda that is back to back to back with no time for transitions between activities or for that like, like that joy of just like being able to be there with dozens or hundreds of people and talk to them freely, I know that the meeting might not be as successful as it could be. So I can scan an agenda, and if you've got it like dialed down to like 2 to 3 minute increments of activities and timing, you're going to have a really different experience than something that's allowing for a bit more emergence and flexibility and physical, emotional, spiritual, and mental health, right?
Yeah. And riding on the same wave, I also always ask the question for the favorite exercise. And I would like to turn it a little bit around. So what is the exercise that you have experienced gives you the most food for drawing, that allows for most depth?
Oh, yeah. Great. I have 2 examples. I think it really depends on the type of meeting that you might be at. So the types of meetings that I feel visual facilitation works really well with is when you have meetings that are often involving a lot of dialogue. And it's not that like the highly scientific or policy meetings don't work well with visuals, because it does. It's just a really different type of output. when I feel like people are trying to have a sense of belonging and connection and the getting to know each other in a deeper way, we're often working in circle or we're working in small groups and allowing people to have time that they wouldn't have in their usual day-to-day lives. So any activities that can stretch time, allow people to have an unencumbered conversation face-to-face, and that's paced like that, like knowing that your turn will come, is very important for allowing people to sink into a place that fosters a deeper way of knowing what you could say next. And so because people can speak then from this like deeper place, the visuals become something different because you can build on each other, not just like I was like the terrible meet. You're not competing, you're building, you're not competing. So you might end up saying something that surprises you in that way. So practices that structure meetings like that, that's going to stretch time, are beautiful for visual work. And if you need to invite that and you're like, yes, but I don't know. I'm like a practitioner that's never done that. I can't picture it. I have an easy way. And so one of the tools that I love to use are photo cards or photo facilitation cards. Have you seen decks like this, like card decks? Yeah. So there's many kinds out there. I probably have 4 or 5, and you can make your own. So like clipping photos that...
I used the game Dixit for that.
Ah, great. Yeah. Great. Yeah. I have cards that are like 8.5 by 11. So like the A1, I think, big paper. I've got tiny ones. It depends on how many people are in the room. And the idea is you put them down or in a circle and you give people a minute to pick one that speaks to them. Maybe you know why it speaks to you. Maybe you don't know. And you ask them to pick a photo that answers a question. So it could be like, how are you feeling today? Let's do a check-in. It could be like, pick a card that speaks to you about a moment of leadership that you've seen in this organization. Or pick a card that speaks to you about, where we're going to be in 5 years. It could be a big question. It could be a small question. And again, being able to talk about a visual allows people to use metaphor. And when we use metaphor, we talk about stories. And it's like this unlocking that happens. It is so profound. And you don't need to draw. People just begin speaking. And so what the practitioner can do, the activity that I would do, is I tape them up on the wall, and then I listen for the 1 or 2 words that really summarize that, maybe on a Post-it note, and then I attach the Post-it note to the picture. And then depending on the agenda, by the end of that circle or by the end of that round, we have this huge wall of these amazing photos with 1 or 2 keywords that go next to it. And we can look at them and we can say, okay, what are the metaphors that this group is working with right now? Like, what's alive for us?
And then you have a meta picture, so to speak.
Yeah. It could be all organic metaphors, or maybe it's all mechanical, or maybe it's only about people. It's really, it's amazing, like meta insight. And then if there's time, if they have more group work afterwards, I might redraw those. So then they have a poster that's got some simplified summaries of the photos that they've chosen, or I simply photograph it and that becomes the document. It depends on, drawing skills and how much time I've got, but it is nice to redraw it as well. So so photo cards and photo facilitation cards.
I love this exercise, and I love drawing the description of other drawings.
Yeah, the nice part about taping them up is that we can move them around. And then, and the next level is then to identify, okay, what are the common values that we've identified, or what are the common characteristics or behaviors? Like, you can really begin to unpack based on that, the next level of the work that you need to do. For most of the groups that I work with, we're doing strategic planning in some ways. And if you don't begin with values, you actually don't have a foundation for the rest of your day. And so even if you have a list of your organizational or your movement's values, if you don't name them, even briefly, to bring that into the space, it's going to come up later anyway. And some groups want to do all of like the thinky work first and then values last. And I'm like, well, we could, but if you don't know why we're here, then we've missed an opportunity. And so I think sometimes beginning, and I might say this to them and I might not, if you begin with the heart work, the heart, like in your heart, we can go, we can go deeper.
That's the same.
Yeah.
The hard work sometimes is the hard work, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And I cannot help myself, but you're mostly working with NGOs, with public sector, with, or maybe only exclusively with clients who want to change the world. At least that's a message that comes across your website. And I find this intriguing. And still have the impression when I hear you speaking that sometimes it sounds quite corporate. So do you also work with corporates, or is it at the end, once we close the doors of the workshop room, we're all the same?
I work with a range of organizations. I would say 80% of the work that we do is in the public sector, nonprofit sector, and with organizations that are doing coalition or like movement building work. When we work with the private sector, and I do, it's because there's a compelling reason to do that as well. The ability to work with the private sector is important because of the well-funded meetings that are possible. And so when you can work with a group that's working in the private sector, you can begin to also see what might be missing from the conversation in the other rooms. And so even in things like healthcare or the environment, if we don't bring everybody with us for these conversations, we are not going to succeed. And so when I choose to do work in the private sector, it's because there is a compelling reason and that the meeting is going to be done in a way that really is meaningful. And partly that could be, maybe there's going to be a huge graphic facilitation team. And to be part of that is phenomenal because you can see then when things are well resourced, how far we can go in a short amount of time, for example, right? So being able to do that is incredible. Having said that, I think the reason why folks often want to work with Drawing Change is because of the experience we have, especially around public health, population health, education. If you've never done work in public health and you don't have similar experience, vocabulary, it's going to be much harder. And that's okay. I think there's lots of good reasons why you would want to hire a practitioner that was maybe local, or you're building up their capacity, or you want somebody who really has like outsider ears. There's lots of good choices for that. But sometimes you also need somebody that can kind of be with the client and be with you kind of like quickly, right? And so that's often the reason why, because of the expertise in these areas, folks want to work with us. Yeah. And especially, and I should say like population and public health, yes, but also community planning, and to recognize the folks on the Drawing Change team, especially Michelle Buchholz and Thierry Jung, who do lots of work around Indigenous communities doing their community plans and strategic planning as well. And those skills, private sector, public sector, the skills around good strategic planning are cross-cutting. It's how you have the meeting that makes the difference. You can't just like arbitrarily drive some spreadsheet. It's not going to happen. It needs to be done in a way that is responsive and culturally aware and culturally safe. Yeah.
And inclusive. I could just go on and on and on. And I had the same impression already when we had our pre-conversation. I just didn't want to stop talking to you. And still, I think an hour is a good kind of time frame also for our audience.
Absolutely. I just want to say thank you so much for these really thoughtful questions. Before our meeting, you had me thinking for days. And I feel like even today I've said things that I was only even thinking to myself. And so the opportunity to think through this with you has been very meaningful. And I really appreciate the space that you've made.
Thank you. Thank you for your words. And if someone now just woke up and doesn't know what you're referring to, how would you summarize our conversation in a nutshell?
Yeah, I think that meetings can create a space with more belonging and with more connection, and that using art is a way into doing that. And so visual facilitation and graphic recording are two tools that almost anyone can use to help. Yeah.
Thank you. And I will put the links to drawing change and to the other resources that you mentioned in your book into the show notes. And also your LinkedIn profile, I guess, so that people who want to work with you, get inspired by you, reach out can.
That would be wonderful. Thank you again for this beautiful conversation. I have so much to think about, and I look forward to listening to more episodes of the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for staying tuned and listening to the show. I appreciate your attention, as I know how busy you are. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and engage by sharing your comments and thoughts, and visit workshops.work to download the one-page summary. I'm looking forward to seeing you back at the next episode, and I wish you a fruitful day.